On the new moon in Gemini, and it's quite an exhausting new moon, I'm sure you can feel, because uh, not only are new moons the lowest energy point of the month, but this one is an aspect to Neptune, which definitely makes us want to just crawl back into bed and hide under the covers and kind of just regroup. And, also let's not forget that we're under these very intense energies of the ongoing Saturn, Pluto, South Node alignment in Capricorn, soon to be in an opposition with Mars and Rahu, or the North Node, in Cancer. So that's perfecting around the middle of the month, but we're feeling the build up to that, and it's very taxing on our energies, to say the least. It's a lot of deep karmic cleanup we're going through. It's a lot of confrontation with our deepest fears, our worst case scenarios, that abyss that we're always trying to avoid, which is the great unknown of the future that is yet to be created or defined, and always that kind of hovering energy of what's really around the corner that we can't predict. No one, no matter how much we try to use all of our mechanisms of the illusion of control, this is a time, I think, when we're really faced with the part of us that just doesn't know. And how do we accept the unknown? How do we live in the unknown? And of course, let's not forget that this new moon is also moving into a difficult, very difficult relationship with that Capricorn trilogy going on with the Saturn, South Node, Pluto. The Gemini new moon, especially as it starts to wax and get deeper into Gemini throughout the day, it's already evening, so it's already starting actually by the time I'm making this video. This inconjunct pattern, this difficult relationship between Gemini and Capricorn, can definitely stir up a lot of overthinking, as I mentioned, worst case scenario thinking, fears, imagined fears, and negativity. Capricorn in its constrictive, little bit rigid, cold potential, it doesn't get along well with that more airy, whimsical, mercurial energy of Gemini. So they have it. It's in an enemy pattern, really. So these energies within us have a hard time reconciling, and so we may be feeling like, how do we turn off our mind? How do we focus? You might have noticed you feel extra exhausted and drained by the onslaught of negative news headlines. Certainly those are amplified right now. I mean, we get enough of those in the feed. And then just all the junky social media barrage of sound bites and just trashy things flashing across your social media feeds. Even when you don't want to be necessarily bombarded by that stuff, if you're trying to just, you might haphazardly stumble upon posts that they're just really soul draining. It's beyond junk food at this point. A lot of it is just garbage, and you don't realize how much mental space it's taking and wasting. And we have to be really deliberate. Gemini is the sign of choice, so we have to be really mindful, another key Gemini word, and deliberate about the choices that we make now and what we choose to really feed our soul with, right? So if we're choosing junk and we don't make space for actually intentionally and deliberately seeking out meaningful information, books or podcasts that are speaking our language, not this kind of junky stuff that's creating more fear and hype, but things we actually want to learn about, things of quality, teachers of quality, information of quality. All of this is essential during this Gemini new moon. So choose well is always the, I think, remedy for the Gemini new moon. Our choices define where we put our time and our energy and how we align ourselves, right? So if we don't choose well, we end up wasting time. So the way you can bring the Gemini and the Capricorn energies into a more workable relationship is choosing well instead of being distracted, because where they don't get along is where Gemini can be a little bit ADD all over the place, and that kind of bipolar swinging between opposites, not settling on anything to great depth. Then the Capricorn comes along and is kind of like the rigid, stern parent that's like, look, you gotta stop wasting time, stop being so distracted, commit, grow up, mature. And that might be some of the inner dialogue going on right now. How do we honor our relationship to time, but keep that fluidity of Gemini? Gemini can be very fun and fluid, and we do need some of the whimsy. We need some of the, sometimes you just want to read a magazine and not a serious novel, and that's okay. It's all a matter of time and place and degree of what our soul is requiring, what our minds are requiring, and what we want to feed our minds. That's really the question of Gemini. And Gemini is also the sign of opposites. So I had an interesting consultation with an Ayurvedic practitioner today at the Assembly, which is where I'm actually a resident astrologer here in San Francisco, so I spend a lot of time there, and there's a lot of amazing, it's a wonderful community of women and practitioners. And I was consulting with this amazing Ayurvedic practitioner today, and we were talking about opposites and how really I loved how she shared that a simple practice in Ayurveda is to think of everything along the lines of a continuum. So she said, like attracts like, and to balance, you always want to think of the opposite. So for instance, if you, like I just finished traveling a lot. I just got back actually from New York City, but before that I was in Switzerland at the Jungian Odyssey, and then before that I was in New Orleans. So it was quite a whirlwind, and I'm so happy to be back and grounded and not wanting to get on a plane again anytime soon, because it's very Vata deranging. Vata is one of the doshas, and it's air. Vata is air, and Gemini is an air sign. And when air gets out of balance, we have a really hard time feeling grounded. We feel dry, we feel depleted, and our minds don't feel very focused. So in a way, Gemini, when it's out of balance, could feel a little bit Vata deranged. Even though dryness, of course, we also associate with Saturn. So the fact that we've also got a strong indication of Saturn at this new moon, as the moon's waxing and getting into that difficult in conjunct with Saturn, I'm thinking Vata. Maybe I'm projecting because I am in a post-Vata state. But anyway, getting back to the point, she was saying that to balance Vata, of course, we want something warm, we want something stable, we want something moistening, because Vata is dry and it's very unstable. It's like ether. So it's being in the air, and we want the moist, grounded, committed kind of energy. So maybe that's a good remedy to think of during this Gemini new moon energy, is that we're kind of craving something that's really grounded to balance. Something more grounded, something more of the earth, something that helps us focus more. I think meditation's a great way to practice, and also eating at regular times can help some of that Vata excess, slowing down, and again, choosing things wisely instead of being all over the map as just an indication. And then also looking at where you feel out of balance, like where you're on that kind of, where you're in some kind of inner ping pong game, match, where it's like you're being thrown from one opposite extreme to the other. How can you bring these two opposites a little bit more into the center line and find some kind of reconciliation? Of course, duality is in some ways an illusion, because we're really looking at two sides of the same coin. It's a continuum, so we want to think about opposites attracting, but also opposites complementing, and the whole both and concept of Gemini. So if we can unify the opposites, internally, the archetype of Gemini is the Lover's tarot card. So it's literally that inner marriage of the inner masculine and feminine. How do we bring these two together in our psyche? How do we unite all inner opposites? So the cold and the hot, or the night and the day, the there's so many opposites now, I'm like losing my ideas of opposites. There's my jet lag kicking in a little bit. But you get the point. So how do we bring in all of these different inner pulls that are happening on us? And how do we not feel like we're constantly in that tug of war? And part of that is saying, look, how do I accept the both and condition? So how can you be, let's say, like one of your inner struggles is that you feel like you want to be completely at rest, and yet you've got a lot of things to do. You know, you've got to be busy, but you also just want to have kind of like a full stop. Well, is there a way you could say both and, where you make space to have your time when you're very productive, and then you have time when you're just completely regenerating your body? Like, how do you incorporate both and, instead of feeling like you have to choose in a way that puts you in that like go, 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 and then completely crash and burn out type of mode, as an example, just as one example. But you can think of other ways you may have to find a working relationship between these inner tug of wars that go on within us. We all have them. And one way to see how you might be most affected by an inner war of the opposites is to look at where you have oppositions in your chart between planets. Of course, all the planets, all 12 signs have their opposite components. So that's one thing you could look at. If there's an emphasis heavy in one sign and no planets in the other sign, it's not necessarily an inner war, but it's certainly something that could feel like an imbalance. And then if you have actually planets at war with each other, like the way we're going to be having this upcoming war between Saturn, South Node, and Mars and the North Node in mid-June, we're all going to feel that as definitely some kind of deep tug of war. But you can look in your own chart to see where you might have a little bit of a seesaw pattern and what needs to be reconciled, and that's an ongoing work. That's not easy. But Gemini, the Gemini new moon, really highlights this for us. So this is a great time to really step back and look at where you're feeling pulled, where you're feeling that kind of inner bipolar. We all have a little bit of bipolar energy in us, especially wherever Gemini is in our chart is where we may play that out more than other places, where we might play out a little bit more of the bipolar back and forth energies. So this new moon is a great time to set intentions about what we want to choose moving forward, where we want to work on reconciling some of these splits within us, these inner splits, these inner polarities, where we want to honor them, again, as the both and principle. And then also thinking about how it's definitely kind of a shadow. Gemini has to do with like the inner dark and light as well. So this is also a good time to do shadow work, especially because we've got that ongoing influence inviting us to do shadow work with Pluto and Saturn and the South Node in Capricorn, sign of the devil, as I've spoken about in many videos, so I won't rehash it here. But the new moon is about choice. I also recommend journaling. Gemini is the sign of journaling. This is a great new moon to journal. Get your journaling in. Have important conversations with your inner twin or with your outer twin. And really look at your mind, look at your mental patterns, look at the way you think, the way you communicate, the way you speak, the way you process conversations, meaning how you feed your mind, where that kind of junky influence of this trashy media world that we're constantly bombarded with is interfering with what you would actually like to be filling your mind with. Like, think about how you could, moving forward, fill your mind with something more meaningful. And also, there's been a lot of studies done recently about how this jumping around that social media and our devices especially encourage, where we're not focusing, we're skimming, we're scrolling, we're skipping around, and our brains are doing that pattern of just skimming things. And we might want to look at during this moon how we can change or break out of that pattern so that we have more focus and more discipline in our response to the information we are choosing to put into our brains and into our minds and into our bodies and into our soul, because it affects us on all levels. So really don't take any of that stuff for granted, and just look at how what you're choosing to focus on, where you're choosing to focus, what you're choosing to read and take in, how that's affecting you. And if you don't, if you can feel it's got a negative influence in any way, or it's toxic, or it's just actually dulling your mind, this is a good time to choose differently what you want to feed your head. So anyway, hopefully this video felt like a good use of your brain and your Mercury and mercurial energies, your Mercury energies, your mind. And thank you so much for your attention and for watching.